Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of just sheer mechanical precision. Like if you break your arm, an X-ray captures that jagged white line, the doctor points to it, and the path to healing is just laid out right in front of you.
Right. It's a very comforting paradigm. I mean, the injury is visible, it's localized, and the intervention is totally straightforward. Put a cast on it, keep it still, and, biology does the rest.
But then you step into the world of psychological trauma, and that entire paradigm just completely collapses.
Oh, absolutely.
Because for the longest time, the diagnostic landscape here has been incredibly murky. We've largely treated trauma like it's a ghost in the machine, a purely emotional wound or a bad memory that you just need to talk through until it fades away.
Hey, just talk it out and it'll get better.
Right. But today, we are taking a massive wrecking ball to that idea. Welcome to our deep dive. Today's mission for you is to explore how overwhelming experiences fundamentally rewire the human body and mind.
And we have some incredible source material today.
We do. We are pulling apart clinical case studies, functional MRI brain scans, and the groundbreaking insights from Dr. Bessel Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score. And what we're looking at, it completely changes the definition of trauma.
It really does.
It actually alters the physical architecture of the brain. It shuts down speech centers. It totally hijacks your autonomic biology.
Which means it is quite literally as physical as that broken bone on an X-ray, even if you can't see it with the naked eye. And before we get into the biological mechanisms of how that happens, we really have to recognize the scale of this.
Yeah, the scope is huge.
It is. It's so tempting to categorize trauma as an extreme outlier. Something isolated to combat veterans or survivors of super rare catastrophes. But the data paints a very different reality.
A much closer reality for most people.
Exactly. 1 in 5 Americans was sexually molested as a child. 1 in 4 was beaten by a parent to the point of leaving a mark. 1 in 3 couples engages in physical violence. I mean, trauma is woven into the everyday fabric of our society.
So our mission today isn't just about understanding severe PTSD. It's about decoding this physical imprint to understand how human beings can actually reclaim their own nervous systems.
Precisely.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because when you look at the early days of treating this, long before anyone had even coined the term post-traumatic stress disorder, the medical establishment was just completely baffled by the sheer physical reality of the symptoms.
They really had no idea what they were looking at.
Right. There is this powerful case study in the sources of a man named Tom. Tom was a Vietnam veteran, and on paper, he was the absolute American dream. High school valedictorian, highly successful lawyer, picture-perfect family.
But internally, a completely different story.
Completely. His daily existence was completely ruled by absolute biological chaos.
And that disconnect between his external success and his internal state is just a classic hallmark of unresolved trauma. I mean, Tom wasn't just struggling with sad memories, right? His nervous system was perpetually launching this massive systemic defense against a threat that basically no longer existed.
Right. So take a mundane event for you and me, like the 4th of July. For most people, it's a picnic. But for Tom, the combination of the summer heat, the humidity, the crack of the fireworks, it instantly triggered the exact physiological state he was in during a horrific ambush in a rice paddy where his entire platoon was killed.
It wasn't a memory. It was a reliving.
Exactly. His kids would be playing in the yard, making, normal kid noises, and his nervous system would flood him with such intense agitation that he had to storm out of his own house, terrified that he might actually become violent with them.
Wow.
And the only way he could sleep was by drinking himself unconscious until his wife found him passed out on the couch.
And this really highlights the critical failure of this standard medical approach at the time. When a patient presents with nightmares and extreme agitation, the traditional reflex is symptom management.
Sure, fix the immediate problem.
Right, so Tom's doctors naturally offered him medication to suppress the nightmares. They just wanted to silence the distress.
And Tom refused the pills.
He did.
His reasoning is devastating, but it tells us so much about the psychology of survival. He told his doctors that if he took the pills and the nightmare stopped, he would essentially be abandoning his dead friends.
Yeah, that loyalty is so profound.
It is. He felt that his suffering was a living memorial, and to stop suffering would mean their deaths were in vain. We tend to treat trauma like a software glitch, like just talk it out or take a pill to reboot the operating system. But looking at Tom's complete physiological takeover, it really seems like a hardware issue. The physical wiring has been fundamentally fried.
Well, the physical wiring hasn't just been fried. It has actively reorganized itself to prioritize survival over everything else.
Yeah.
The psychiatrist Abram Kardner, who studied World War I veterans, actually nailed this concept way back in 1941.
Wait, 1941.
Yeah, in 1941, he wrote, quote, "The nucleus of the neurosis is a physioneurosis."
A physioneurosis, meaning the neurosis isn't just in the mind, it's literally anchored in the physical tissue of the body.
Yes. So when Tom heard those fireworks, it wasn't a bad memory making him anxious. His sympathetic nervous system was literally dumping massive amounts of cortisol and adrenaline into his bloodstream. His heart rate spiked, his breathing became shallow, his body was mounting a whole organism defense to fight for his life in a rice paddy in Vietnam.
Because his body doesn't know the war is over.
Exactly. The body does not know the war is over.
Yeah.
And this is why traditional talk therapy can be so frustratingly ineffective for trauma survivors. You just cannot use logic or language to convince a flooded, hyper-aroused nervous system that it is safe.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you're being chased by a tiger, you don't want your brain to stop and analyze the tiger's childhood feeling.
No, you definitely do not.
You want your biology to just take over and make you run. But if someone is stuck in that flooded biological state permanently, how does that warp the way they process the world right in front of them?
Well, it systematically dismantles their mental flexibility. When all your biological resources are allocated to scanning for immediate threats, your perception radically shrinks. You basically lose the ability to interpret nuance or ambiguity.
Which brings us to the Rorschach ink blot tests. This part completely blew my mind.
Ah, this study is wild.
Yeah, we all know the basic premise. A doctor shows you an ambiguous ink blot, and you're supposed to just use your imagination. A healthy brain looks at a random splat of ink and says, oh, that looks like two dancers, or it's a butterfly.
Right, norm rejection.
But when researchers administered this test to 21 Vietnam veterans, the results were horrific. 16 of them looked at these random ink shapes and saw highly specific graphic war scenes. They saw things like the severed limbs of a friend after a mortar strike.
Just from abstract ink?
Yeah. And the other 5 veterans didn't see anything at all. They just saw ink on paper.
What's fascinating here is how clearly this demonstrates the biological collapse of imagination. The healthy human brain naturally plays with ambiguous stimuli. It projects possibilities. It invents narratives.
Plays.
Right, it plays. But for these 16 veterans, their brains were trapped in a rigid loop, compulsively superimposing their trauma onto the present reality. And for the 5 who saw nothing, well, their nervous systems had engaged in a massive biological shutdown just to protect them from feeling anything at all.
Wait, so these veterans couldn't even force themselves to imagine a different scenario. Their actual capacity for imagination was biologically stolen from them?
Yes, because imagination requires a baseline of safety. If your brain perceives that you are in mortal danger, it literally shuts down the neural pathways responsible for creativity and future planning.
Wow.
You cannot envision a new career, a happy relationship, or a peaceful tomorrow if your biology is entirely consumed by surviving a terrifying past. This mechanism actually mirrors the tragic but crucial experiments conducted by Mayer and Seligman involving inescapable shock.
Ugh, the dog experiments. Those are really tough to read. But the mechanics they reveal are undeniable.
They are deeply unsettling, yes, but they form the absolute foundation of our understanding of trauma. The researchers placed dogs in locked cages and repeatedly administered electrical shocks, and the dogs couldn't escape no matter what they did.
Right.
Eventually, the researchers opened the cage doors and applied the shock again. Now, control dogs, who had never been shocked before, immediately leaped out of the open cages to safety.
As you would expect.
But the dogs who had experienced the inescapable shock previously, they didn't even try to move. With the doors wide open, they just lay on the floor and whimpered.
I think the common interpretation of that is just that they, gave up. But based on what we're discussing about biology, this isn't a conscious choice to surrender, is it?
Not at all. It is a profound physiological adaptation called learned helplessness. When an organism's fight-or-flight response is repeatedly thwarted, like when you are trapped, terrified, and cannot take any physical action to save yourself, the nervous system essentially short-circuits.
It just breaks down.
Exactly. The biological drive to protect oneself is overridden by a deep autonomic shutdown. The brain learns that action is futile, so it stops sending the signals to take action.
So researchers could observe this behavior in dogs, and they could see the loss of imagination in the ink blot tests, but for decades they were still essentially locked out of the engine room. They were just guessing at the mechanics.
Largely, yes.
But that all changes in the 1990s with the arrival of fMRI technology, because for the first time, science could actually look inside a human brain while a trauma memory was actively firing.
It was a total watershed moment in neuroscience. We moved from observing external behavior to watching the internal metabolic activity of the brain in real time.
And here's where it gets really interesting. There is an incredible study detailed here involving a woman named Marcia. 13 years before the study, Marcia had been in a horrific car accident where she tragically lost both her 5-year-old daughter and her unborn child.
Just unimaginable.
Unimaginable. And to understand what was happening in her brain, researchers placed her inside an fMRI machine and played an audio script recounting the details of her accident. They triggered a flashback on purpose. And the resulting scans completely redefine what a memory actually is.
Because a trauma memory doesn't behave like a normal memory at all.
No, it doesn't.
When Marcia heard that script, the right limbic area of her brain, which processes emotions and visual imagery, lit a bright red on the scan. It was completely hyperactive.
But the most shocking part was what vanished. Broca's area, which sits in the left frontal lobe and serves as the brain's speech center, showed a massive decrease in activation. It literally appeared as a blank white spot on the scan. It went completely offline.
It went dark.
Yeah, and at the exact same time, Brodmann's area, 19, the visual cortex, was firing with intense metabolic activity, exactly as if the car accident were happening right there inside the MRI scanner.
Which tells us that for Marcia's brain, 13 years had not passed. Time had biologically stopped.
I have to stop and marvel at the implications of this, because we use the phrase speechless with terror all the time.
Right, all the time.
But this fMRI data proves it isn't just a dramatic metaphor. When someone is triggered, their brain's speech center has literally lost its blood supply and gone offline, similar to what happens during a stroke.
That is the exact mechanism.
Yes.
It is a literal physiological deactivation of the language centers. This is why trauma is fundamentally pre-verbal.
Pre-verbal?
Yes. When trauma victims are brought into emergency rooms, they're often sitting completely mute. Their right brain is exploding with terrifying sensory fragments, images, sounds, smells. But their left brain, the part that applies logic, sequences events, and turns experiences into a cohesive narrative, is completely incapacitated.
This completely upends the traditional approach to therapy. I mean, if a well-meaning therapist asks a survivor to sit on a couch and narrate what happened to them with a clear beginning, middle, and end, they're asking them to do something that is biologically impossible in that moment.
Yes, the very act of being triggered shuts down the tool you're asking them to use.
That is wild. So if the speech center is offline, what is the rest of the brain doing? To really grasp this, we have to look at the underlying architecture. The text breaks down the human brain into 3 evolutionary levels. The triune brain.
A great model for this.
At the base, sitting right on top of the spinal cord, is the reptilian brain. This handles the autonomic functions, heart rate, respiration, basic survival arousal.
The housekeeping stuff.
Right. Then above that, you have the limbic system, the mammalian brain. This is your emotional core, your danger monitor, and it basically judges whether things are pleasurable or life-threatening.
Yes.
And finally, at the top is the neocortex, specifically the frontal lobes. This is the sophisticated, rational part of us that handles empathy, language, and complex planning.
And a healthy, functioning mind relies on constant, balanced communication between that rational top layer and the emotional, threat-detecting middle layer.
Let me try out an analogy here for you. Think of your amygdala, which lives inside that emotional limbic system, as your kitchen's smoke detector. It's highly sensitive. And think of your frontal lobes as the logical cook.
Okay, I like this.
Normally, if a pan gets too hot, the smoke detector goes off, the cook walks over, assesses the situation, realizes it's just burnt toast, and turns off the alarm.
Right, perfectly normal.
But when a trauma trigger occurs, the smoke detector blares with such overwhelming intensity that it severs communication with the cook. The cook might be screaming that it's just burnt toast, but you can't hear them. You have zero access to logic. Your biology just makes you run out of the burning building.
That captures the dynamic perfectly.
Right.
The alarm system hijacks the entire organism. But what determines whether that alarm system eventually resets or if it gets stuck in the on position permanently? To understand that, we can look at the story of a 5-year-old boy named Noam on September 11th.
Yeah, Noam's story is incredible. He was in Lower Manhattan on 9/11 and actually witnessed the planes hitting the towers. He saw the fire, the chaos, and tragically, he saw people jumping from the burning buildings.
It is an unimaginably horrific event for anyone, let alone a child, to witness.
Totally. Yet the very next day, he drew a picture of the Twin Towers, and at the bottom of the buildings, he drew a large black circle. When his parents asked him what it was, he said it was a trampoline, so the people jumping would be safe.
Now compare Noam to the Vietnam veterans who couldn't see anything but horror in the ink blots, or to Marcia, whose speech center shut down. Why was Noam able to retain his imagination?
Why did his brain act differently?
Because during the disaster, Noam wasn't trapped. He was able to take physical action. He ran away, escaping the immediate threat, and crucially, he was surrounded by calm, fiercely protective caregivers.
So his body was allowed to do what it was designed to do. He completed the biological fight-or-flight cycle.
Exactly. Because he achieved physical safety, his body discharged the survival energy. The smoke detector quieted down. And because the alarm stopped ringing, his frontal lobes, his cook, came back online. This allowed him to use his rational mind and his imagination to process the horror, to invent that trampoline, and to integrate the experience.
Wow.
In a traumatized patient, that biological escape response is thwarted. They were held down or trapped in a vehicle or locked in a cage. They couldn't run. The cycle never completed, so the alarm never stops ringing.
So what does this all mean for daily survival? I mean, if you are living with a smoke detector that is constantly screaming, how do you endure that unbearable internal noise?
Well, people find ways to cope, but from the outside, those coping mechanisms can look completely irrational or even highly destructive.
Which leads to an experiment described in the text that absolutely floored me. Researchers took a group of Vietnam veterans and had them submerge their hands in a bucket of freezing ice water while watching Platoon, a highly graphic combat movie.
Just intense physical and mental stress.
Right. And normally, keeping your hand in ice water is agonizing. But these veterans were able to keep their hands in the water 30% longer while watching the intense combat footage. The researchers calculated that the stress of the combat footage acted as a literal physiological painkiller equivalent to administering 8 milligrams of morphine.
It's astounding.
I struggled to wrap my head around this. Wait, so extreme stress and terror actually triggered a chemical high. Is this why we see survivors repeatedly returning to dangerous environments or abusive partners?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of evolutionary biology, it makes a tragic kind of sense. You see, when the mammalian brain is under extreme stress or physical attack, it secretes endogenous opioids and endorphins.
Okay.
These are natural morphine-like chemicals designed to blunt pain so an organism can survive long enough to escape. But if someone lives in a constant state of trauma, their body can actually become addicted to its own internal pharmacy.
They develop a physiological addiction to the trauma itself.
Yes, exactly. For many survivors, normal, safe life feels numb, dead, and empty. But danger or chaos triggers that massive endorphin rush. It makes them feel alive, and ironically, it kills their emotional pain.
That is profoundly sad.
It is, but it shatters the profound misconception that victims of abuse return to violent partners out of weakness or some moral failing. They are often trapped in the physiological addiction to the pain relief cycle that their own brain chemistry has created.
So while survivors were unknowingly self-medicating with chaos, the medical establishment decided to medicate them with actual pharmaceuticals.
Right, the pill era.
This ushered in the pharmacological revolution, drugs like thorazine, lithium, and eventually SSRIs like Prozac. And the financial scale of this is just staggering. The text points out that in 2008 alone, Medicaid spent $3.6 billion on antipsychotics, frequently prescribing them to severely abused children just to make them more manageable.
Yeah, but we do have to acknowledge nuance here. Medications can serve a critical purpose.
Fair point.
Drugs like Prozac can dampen a hyperactive smoke detector just enough to give a patient a vital window of perspective. They can create enough space between a trigger and a reaction so that a person isn't completely enslaved by their panic.
But the text is very clear that there is a massive limit to the pill era. A pill cannot cure trauma.
No, because a pill fundamentally ignores the physical body. Medication might chemically mute the alarm bell, but it does not teach the nervous system that it is safe.
It doesn't rewire the broken hardware.
Exactly. It doesn't rewire the broken hardware or complete that thwarted fight-or-flight cycle. When you heavily medicate a traumatized child simply to make them compliant, you aren't healing their neurobiology. You are just making them easier for the adults around them to manage. while simultaneously blunting their curiosity, their ability to play, and their capacity to learn.
So we've covered incredible ground today. The ultimate takeaway for you here is that trauma is not a cognitive problem. It is a physiological reorganization of the brain and nervous system. It deactivates the speech centers, it paralyzes the imagination, and it locks the biology in a permanent state of threat.
It's entirely biological.
Which means healing requires so much more than just talking, and it requires more than masking symptoms with a pill. It requires a bottom-up approach.
And this is exactly where the hope lies. A bottom-up approach targets the reptilian and limbic systems first. Instead of trying to use logic, therapies focus on physical movement, breath work, rhythm, and sensory integration.
Bypassing the broken speech center completely.
Right. Techniques like EMDR, yoga, or neurofeedback directly engage the vagus nerve and the autonomic nervous system. They allow the body to physically experience safety, to slowly discharge that trapped survival energy so the frontal lobes can finally come back online.
This raises an important question, something that stems directly from the science we've explored today. The sources highlight that the brain is built in a use-dependent manner. Neurons that fire together wire together.
Right, neuroplasticity.
And our frontal lobes, the parts of our brain responsible for healing, empathy, and logic, rely heavily on mirror neurons to connect with and regulate alongside other humans. So, looking at our modern society, which is increasingly isolated, profoundly digital, and disconnected from physical face-to-face community, are we collectively starving ourselves of the very interpersonal biology required to heal trauma?
Scary thought.
If our nervous systems fundamentally require safe physical connection with another regulated human being to reset, what happens to a society that lives entirely through screens?
This raises an important question, maybe the defining question of our current era. We have evolved to heal in community. When we strip away physical proximity, we strip away the biological mechanisms of safety.
A broken bone needs a physical cast to set properly, but a broken nervous system requires safe people, attuned faces, and a genuinely safe environment to rewire. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the incredible realities of how our bodies keep the score. Keep asking questions, keep looking out for one another's humanity, and keep exploring the fascinating architecture of your own mind. We'll see you next time.